So in this session, we want to think through how a WAC program like ours, particularly in our efforts to sustain a WAC seminar and to develop our writing associate program, can sustain our work as the years roll. How do we develop and leverage our firm friendship with stakeholders, that is administrators, faculty, students, and community members? How do we weather the passing seasons within our wider institutional context? And how do we manage time and change as we design and iterate our programming? So to explore these questions, we have three objectives with our brief time together to explore these questions with you. First, Kay will introduce an action planning framework that we've used for WAC program development. And then in groups, we'll present 5 brief case studies on how the framework helps us understand and plan what we've done in recent years. And as part of that, after each case study, we'll introduce reflection questions that you'll be able to write about for 2 minutes in each case study, either on your own or in a linked doc that will, Google Doc that we'll share, both in chat and that you'll have access to. I forgot, like, give me a second here. I want to make sure I have chat open. I forgot to do that. So before we turn things over to Kay to get us started, I want to just call attention to where you can access resources related to this presentation. We've got the documents connected through the Whova conference portal for a session, and then through links in the chat. And as you can see, I've got a link to a OneDrive public folder with all of our session materials at below go.osu.edu/IWAC21 OSU materials, all crunched together. So we have 2 handouts, an overview of Kay's action plan framework and a handout on our WAC seminar planning that Christina and Joao will be speaking to, along with the slide deck. So we'll post a lot of these as many times as we can, but feel free to ask in the chat for links. We'll also keep an eye on the chat if you have any questions or need access to any resources. So I'll turn things over to Kay, who will introduce the action framework that will provide a lens for our case study and on your own reflection as we go along.
Oh, thanks, Chris. On this next slide, you'll see here just a brief overview of the action plan framework. As Chris noted, the complete document with spaces to with additional questions and so forth are in the Whova materials. But I just want to say in 2016, I took over, Chris alluded to, the Michael B. Drake Institute for Teaching and Learning at Ohio State. And I was appointed to lead that unit in 2016. And I made the decision to move 75% of my appointment to the Institute from my faculty position in the English department and my directorship of our second-year writing program. And that decision was driven really in part, at least in part, by the opportunity to elevate the interests of writing instruction to the enterprise level. I felt because the Institute is situated and reports to the provost, it was a university-wide space through which I felt I could leverage a little bit of interest that really was absent for me as a director of a second-year writing program. The Institute really afforded for me the ground from which to situate and make more visible and legible the already rich and burgeoning work in WAC, WID, and digital media studies in particular, some of which are situated in the Department of English and others in our Center for the Study and Teaching of Writing, and that's CSTW. And central to cultivating the change that I sought as director of the Institute was a shift in my thinking around that same tide toward leveraging macro level actions advocated by Barbara Wohlford and later by Michelle Cox, Jeffrey Galin, and Dan Melzer. And that was a shift that included conceptualizing the action framework that informs our session today and for which you have the slide up now. This is just an abbreviated form. Now that action framework was constructed, as you'll see there in the footnote, along with my colleagues, Jennifer Schnabel of Ohio State University Libraries and Melissa Cherry, then a library at Denison University in Granville, Ohio. And we first presented that framework in March 2016 down in Savannah. Oh, Chris, you were there too. I just remembered that. When we applied it to collaborations across writing programs, writing centers, and university libraries. So those were the key partners as part of that particular engagement with the framework. And there we were looking at supporting students' research-based writing. So the kind of issue or need we had identified really revolved around how do we better support students across disciplines and across our 3 units. At that time, it was University Library, second level writing, and the Writing Center. And you'll see highlighted on the slide 3 of the most salient elements for Jen, Melissa, and me as we developed the program to support research-based writing in first and second year writing. And that was also built around the work of Joseph Bizup, that rhetorically based approach to research-based writing. And the framework really served as a heuristic for us, as a map that helped us negotiate the various and particular geographies and contours of our institutions and locations. Denison, for example, is a small liberal arts college, very, very different institutional context for Melissa than it was for Jen and me at Ohio State. But the action-oriented collaborative mindset of the framework, and you'll see this as Jonathan Buell, my colleague at Ohio State, looked at this list and was working with me on this framework, because this is also an iterative framework. It's one that really has changed and developed over time. He said, this looks like stasis theory to me, right? You begin with the question, you begin with the definition, and then you move through these various elements. And I think he's right. I think it is that. It also really, to me, resonated to think about our framework and how we're thinking about this, as I reflected earlier today on Linda Adler-Kastner and Elizabeth Wardle's presentation, as well as Leslie Bruce's presentation just previous to this one, her work at Cal State Fullerton. So I see a lot of us thinking about how we might best go about thinking strategically, systematically, and sustainably about how we think about, create, and then leverage the partnerships that we're developing. It's particular to our work today, and what you'll be hearing about here in a few minutes, especially from Chris, as he talks about teaching through writing and the program that he developed through the WAC program at Ohio State. The framework was one that I used as director of the Institute to create a whole program, an enterprise level program for making more visible and legible all professional learning at the university related to teaching and learning. So we partnered from the Drake Institute with Chris in the WAC program to create those kind of sustained semester-long and sometimes year-long programs where we work with cohorts of faculty on developing and redeveloping a curriculum that integrates writing, in the case of Chris's Teaching Through Writing program. The endorsements are, and I'll shortly put in the chat links to the materials on the Drake Institute website that explain the endorsements a little bit more fully. But we've partnered with a number of offices across campus, distance education, university libraries, our Center for Human Ethics, our graduate school and postdoc office, as well as CSTW and our digital media project in the Department of English. Quite simply, our goal is to work collaboratively to create and incentivize new programs or make more visible and legible these dynamic and sustainable professional learning programs like the ones in the WAC program. Teaching endorsements, this is what we call them, and these credentials, are the centralized and incentivized program. And I can talk about those a little, both the centralization and the incentivizing for those programs if you all are interested in hearing a little bit more about those. But they've created a means for us to direct attention at the university and drive forward critical teaching and learning issues on our campus, like inclusive teaching, meaningful inquiry, teaching through writing. So we're elevating those issues and those challenges at the same time we're creating and elevating the programs in our partners' works. As I said, you'll hear in a few minutes from Chris and the work in the WAC program and Writing Center within CSTW, which has been a critical partner for the Institute now for over 5 years, as they've been working on creating, implementing, and revisioning this endorsement and building that Writing Associates program that Jackie's going to be talking about that takes as a central premise students as stakeholders and partners in our work. And so together, WAC, the Writing Center, CSTW, and the Institute have, I believe, really succeeded in elevating conversations around teaching and writing and successfully created sustained and sustainable learning opportunities for instructors and students. And so I'm going to turn it over here in just a moment, but we do have your first reflective question. So as Chris noted, and as I did, we've built several points during the presentation during which we want to invite you to reflect on a series of questions built from the framework. And so there will be a series of sort of scaffolded questions that you can engage here in a moment. So we encourage you to either use the Google Doc, which is linked there in the chat, or work independently on your own devices to record your reflections. And I believe now we're going to start then on that 2-minute opportunity for you to write on those reflective questions.
Take another 30 seconds or so. Okay. So moving on to the next section, I'm going to be talking about our various attempts to start extended WAC seminars and sustain them over time, and the kinds of particular administrative challenges that can pop up. So in my time coordinating the WAC program at CSDW, we've made several attempts at engaging instructors beyond the one and done workshops and consulting that we do throughout the year. We've largely done this through multi-session WAC seminars and also through our course-embedded undergraduate writing consulting program, the Writing Associates, or WAS. While Jackie will speak to the WAS later in this session, in my case study, I want to look at some of our earlier efforts at WAC seminars through parts of the framework that ask us to identify institutional, programmatic, cultural, and administrative challenges, to link our interventions to wider institutional initiatives and emerging contexts, and to look towards longer-term sustainability. As Michelle Cox, Jeff Galin, and Dan Melzer argue in their book, Sustainable WAC, WAC programmers need to be attentive to sustainability indicators across social, economic, and institutional systems that they work within, particularly those that might signal things that might hamper program viability in the longer term. So we started around 2009 with what we called WAVE, Written, Oral, Visual, and Electronic Communication, a 5-session seminar with targeted departmental cohorts of graduate students and faculty who received modest stipends for participation. After a few years, it became more difficult to recruit these cohorts. So we followed this up with a looser book discussion format, which was more widely promoted across campus and where participants got free copies of the books we discussed. So while we were able to develop some lasting results with ongoing partnerships with departments and faculty, and that we saw some visible effects on teaching and instructor development that showed up in later research on instructor and department teaching support for both of these efforts, it became more difficult to recruit new participants after our initial successes. So given these challenges in sustaining these programs, I want to look at a few wider institutional issues that may have made our earlier attempts at WAC seminars less sustainable than they might have been. And then I'll briefly talk about our current WAC seminar and how it seems to potentially have more staying power. The first issue was a lack of centralized oversight or support of writing curriculum. So while Ohio State has a general education writing requirement that has been taught in 30 departments throughout the university, there's been little or no centralized oversight or support of these courses. The WAC program has no formal connection to this part of the curriculum other than the close working relationships we've been able to develop with the WPAs and instructors in many of the departments offering this course. Furthermore, our research and cultures of support and departments found that policies and resources for instructor development and training varied widely, with some instructors who were mostly graduate students in most departments getting lots of support and oversight, and others getting nearly none. The second issue was having few meaningful incentives or rewards for faculty to participate in teaching development. Our conversations with department level WPAs and our research into teaching support across campus revealed that while many instructors found our programs compelling, there weren't enough incentives for them to feel like the time that they would spend on teaching development would be sufficiently recognized or compensated more widely by the institution. Next, there was a lack of physical space or common time to hold extended programming. So space to hold these workshops has become more and more at a premium. There are few places on campus to hold larger kinds of workshops that do not require significant funding to reserve. Furthermore, OSU's conversion to semesters has made it very difficult to find a common time where enough faculty are free to commit to programs like ours. And lastly, has been a general lack of visibility for CSTW and WAC because of our narrow institutional location. We're in a division of arts and humanities and a much larger college of arts and sciences in a university with 16 colleges throughout. So while our partnerships with more central groups like our Teaching and Learning Center and online and e-learning unit give us opportunities to reach audiences across campus, our narrow institutional location and equally narrow access to resources often made it difficult for us to be recognized more widely. Well, recent developments, including the Drake Institute's endorsement program that Kay just spoke to, and an upcoming major revision of Ohio State's general education curriculum, provided us an opportunity to try another version of our WAC seminar, which we started in 2018. This time we wanted to center strategies for teaching writing that took into account what Juan Guerra calls student incomes. That is, making the experiences, knowledges, and identities students bring to their learning a core of our teaching practice. To do this, we drew on a range of inclusive teaching frameworks, including Marianne Winklemas's Transparency in Learning and Teaching, Decoding the Disciplines, Culturally Sustaining Pedagogies, Anti-Racist Writing Assessment Ecologies, and Universal Design for Learning. So participation in the past 3 years has been pretty robust. Apart from a few semesters like spring 2020 in the wake of COVID, where we haven't been able to run a session. In this time, we've been able to run 10 seminars over 3 years. We've had 67 participants from 28 different departments. Juan and Christina will talk more about how we framed, reframed, and adapted the seminar over the years. And Minsuk will speak to how we've put teacher reflection at the center of a lot of our activity in the seminar. So I want to leave you with a few questions for our next 2-minute reflection based on the action plan themes I discussed in our case study. So what are some sustainability indicators for the WAC efforts at your institution? That is, what data points might tell you, what kind of impact you're having on the institution and what you're looking to achieve? And what broader institutional challenges do you see affecting your planning? So again, either in the reflection document or on your own, reflect for about 2 minutes on these questions. 30 more seconds. Great, thank you. I'll turn things over to Juan Christina.
Okay, this section presents what the WAC team has done and plan to address teachers' practical needs through the Teaching Through Writing seminar, which Dr. Manian described previously. And this presentation will tap into number 5, 7, and 11 of the action plan framework. Next slide, please. As the pandemic began, the WAC team identified challenges in administrating face-to-face seminar in summer 2020. We changed it into an online-based hybrid format consisting of synchronous and asynchronous parts. To continuously leverage instructors' skills, knowledge, resources, and interest on applying writing as a pedagogical tool in their teaching, the WAC team identified some needed interventions. For instance, we focused on creating more diverse approaches to foster discussion in the hybrid format through Carmen, an OSU version of Canvas, and also Zoom. This hybrid format invited more participants, including instructors from other OSU campuses, and continuously created opportunities for participants to reflect on their use of writing in their courses during pandemic. However, the WAC team identified some room for improvement. For example, the WAC team needed to get more familiarized with the Zoom platform to promote various ways of interactions among participants because they wanted to have more discussion time rather than mini lectures during the synchronous meeting. Yeah, so.
Perfect. So one of the strategic institutional changes we made during the autumn 2020 seminar was switching to this asynchronous synchronous format. Linking the problem of needed discussion during our meeting times to the related materials of the seminar, we constructed a Carmen Canvas course that was organized by week with videos that went over key writing strategies previously presented on during the in-person meetings. These videos were then followed by worksheets and short discussion posts to have participants engage with key outcomes before joining the week's Zoom session. The format granted us the additional time to place participants into small groups and develop more meaningful and manageable conversations. Many of these conversations even gave us the opportunity to work through specific examples or concerns about their own students and courses, allowing participants to assess their own students' learning outcomes and reflective practices, while at the same time arriving at solidified writing assignments. Once the seminar was finished, we identified that stakeholders could benefit with additional workshop time. Next slide. Oh, one more back. Thank you. So due to the meaningful addition of small group discussion, the WAC team proposed adding an additional 30 minutes to the end of each workshop in order to help instructors one-on-one with their writing assignment and rubric. After a number of instructors did not submit or complete this final seminar task the previous semester. Unfortunately, we did not have any participants for the spring 2021 seminar, as Dr. Manian had mentioned. We were unable to identify whether it was because of the additional workshop time that we added or that we had scheduled the seminar at the end of the semester, which was challenging enough because of the pandemic. We have since worked to identify the needs of those at stake So in order to address the sustainability of the seminar and ultimately supporting instructors, we are working to identify ways to condense our material, but still keep the measurable success of engaging in conversation with instructors.
And from this experience, and from autumn 2021, year post-pandemic, the WAC team plans to enhance the asynchronous portion of the seminar by creating a workbook matching with the online platform. And this is expected to increase participants' asynchronous participation, as well as their continuous reflection on their use of writing in their courses, even after the seminar. And in the following section, teacher reflection will be discussed more in depth. And lastly, the WAC team also plans to provide more support by preparing voluntary workshop times or supplemental materials, but emphasize that all these are voluntary but not mandatory. So based on what the OSU WAC team did and your own institution have done, we would like to reflect on these one of these two questions for 2 minutes.
Okay, about 30 more seconds. Great. So it looks like Minsuk was unable to join us this afternoon. So we'll move on to Jackie's presentation, but I'll give you just a really quick overview of what we would have talked about, and we can talk a little bit about in the discussion if you have some questions about this. So Minsuk was going to talk about how we've incorporated teacher self-reflection in the seminar. That we were using it to sort of leverage, what the instructors were bringing to the seminar themselves, to have them kind of think about and articulate their experiences teaching, but also to sort of put that in light of the kinds of experiences that they've had with their students, and to look and think about the writing and activity that their students were doing in their classrooms. And we're basing that a lot on a lot of the teacher research on reflection that we've been working on recently in our studies of teacher and GA development, and using that as a assessment tool in our looking at the kinds of effects that some of this reflection was having on the development of the teachers at Ohio State. So sort of reflecting on the options that we would have. So I'll turn things over to Jackie to talk about her part of the framework and our embedded writing associates program.
Sure. So another component of our WAC program, as Chris and everyone has been discussing, is our Writing Associates program, or the WA program. And WAs are undergraduate students that the WAC program embeds in courses across the disciplines. So in brief, these WAs are helping instructors to communicate writing expectations to their students, and also helping students understand instructors' writing expectations, and a lot more besides. There are a lot of components that we could talk about the WA program, but today I would like to focus on the WAs themselves and their continued training and development. And we'll use the lenses of points 5 and 7 on our action plan framework. So leveraging partners' skills, knowledge, resources, and interests, and then identifying interventions, approaches, correctives, and innovations to address needs. Next slide, please. Now, the partners I'm referring to here are the WAs themselves. As employees of our WAC program, they are stakeholders in the program. They're instrumental in the growth and success of WAC work in disciplinary classrooms. And the area where we needed to innovate was our weekly WA staff meeting. The previous iteration of this meeting had basically involved each WA just discussing their work from the past week. And I say discussing, but it was actually a lack of discussion that was one of several issues we identified with the meetings. Because the WAs weren't actually discussing with one another. They were mostly just recounting things individually to me and to Chris as the program directors without engaging with one another much at all. And so that was one issue. A second issue is that many of the WAs seemed disengaged from the meetings, you almost checked out of them. And the fact that these high achieving, very motivated students seemed checked out of the meetings was a signal to us that there was an issue with how the meetings are being conducted. And the disengagement was even more noticeable because Chris and I also had less frequent one-on-one meetings where we checked in with each WA. And in those meetings, the WAs were much more engaged. They had lots of great insights, really smart and thoughtful stuff. And so as we were considering interventions for our staff meetings, we discussed what kinds of interventions would both make the meetings themselves feel more worthwhile for the WAs, that would get them more engaged, and that would also help the WAs start talking with and learning from one another instead of just looking to me and to Chris. Next slide, please. Our intervention involved an overhaul of the WA staff meetings that reimagined them as professional development for our working WAs. In these meetings, we would do a variety of different things. We'd still open the floor to discussion every week, but we would also have another different development focused activity each week. So we might share excerpts from a reading related to WAC, like a piece on genre or on transfer theory, and then we'd discuss as a group how concepts from that reading might be implemented in our WA work. Or we might focus on particular skills that could be useful to WAs in conducting their work. So things like interviewing instructors to determine sometimes tacit expectations, or providing manageable, meaningful written feedback on student texts in a course. We would also introduce skills that the WAs could then pass on to students, like reading strategies for unfamiliar disciplinary texts. Or we might offer WAs resources on how to recognize the needs of a variety of different student populations, thinking about how they could offer supportive WA services to, for example, English language learners or students with disabilities. And we'd also help the WAs think about strategizing as to how to best manage their time and balance their own work-life academic schedules. An activity that I found particularly valuable that generated a lot of good conversation was providing WAs with a case study of sorts. We'd present them with a scenario from WA work, and we would often draw these from actual things that our previous WAs had experienced. So these were kind of like true life WA adventures. And we would then prompt the WAs to brainstorm as a group how they might respond in this particular situation. So for example, we might offer a prompt like, imagine it's the beginning of the semester and the instructor you're partnered with is a bit overzealous about what you can accomplish as a WA in just one semester. And then we'd ask the WAs to strategize together about how they could still do productive work with this instructor while also managing the instructor's expectations a bit. And so scenarios like these gave the WAs an opportunity to talk to one another, not simply to Chris and to me. And so they could say all of those smart things that they had shared one-on-one with us to each other, while also getting some ideas for how they might respond to complex situations that they might encounter in future WA work. And as I mentioned, we'd also encourage the WAs to share updates about their own work and the meetings. And we had several meetings this semester dedicated to discussion and reflection on their current WA partnerships. Click, please. But what Chris and I actively tried to do with these update meetings was to become not the party that was being reported to, but rather a facilitator of conversation. So for example, if a WA mentioned they were having an issue in their partnership, we'd try not to jump in and offer an immediate solution from on high. Instead, we would sort of crowdsource responses from the other WAs. We'd open up the floor to discussions of strategies for responding to the issues. And in this way, we were again encouraging the WAs to learn from each other. We wanted to bring their knowledge and their insights to the fore with this collective problem solving to create a more collaborative meeting environment and hopefully a more stimulating learning experience as well. Next slide, please. So looking forward, this example is perhaps more relevant to those who are working with undergraduate or graduate students as part of a WAC program, but I think it can also be relevant in some ways to those who are facilitating meetings of stakeholders who are doing independent but similar work. With student employees in particular, though, I think it's important to recognize that they can contribute in meaningful ways to programmatic growth and improvement. By attending to how our WAs were responding to our staff meetings, we were able to determine where and how we might innovate in our meeting structure, as well as where and how we might foster and facilitate more opportunities for collaboration among our student stakeholders. So then some questions to carry forward from our particular situation here might be these. How can you not only recognize issues that impact different stakeholders, but address them in generative and collaborative ways with stakeholders? And then when working with student stakeholders in a WAC program, how can you facilitate opportunities for students to learn from and collaborate with one another? And you can reflect on these questions for the next 2 minutes.
Thirty more seconds. Great, thank you. So we're going to open up the floor now, and I'll shut down the presentation so I can, monitor the questions either in chat, or you're welcome to raise your hand. It's a smaller group, so you may even be able to speak up. And I'll also keep an eye on the conference platform if you're going to be offering questions there. But I'll remind you that you can access all our session materials at go.osu.edu IWAC 21 OSU materials, where we'd be able to access that. Great. Whatever questions, however you're comfortable including them. Okay, Annie Helseth?
I apologize. I was actually just clapping for you guys.
Oh, okay, great.
That was it. I'll let everyone else ask their questions before I pipe
Okay,
up.
thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Wendy. Wendy has a question for us.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. It was a very informative presentation, and I like the interactive part too, because there's always time to reflect, or never time to reflect, rather. So I can't remember who mentioned it, but earlier, about maybe a fourth of the way through, someone mentioned something about it was with the faculty workshops. So, you know, providing the faculty workshops, working through them, but then the issue of getting the faculty to actually then move from the process to whatever the deliverable is, if that's like revising their syllabus or revising assignment. And I get it, because I'm like that too, right? But I'm just wondering if you all had any successes in that space, because that's a challenge that we've had as well. And I think part of it has to do with just whenever we're able to get those to kind of fit in the projects or the workshops, right? So if it's a short workshop, and we even did one last semester where it was over 8 or 9 weeks, but then by the time that we're past midterms, everyone's crunched, you know. So anyway, that's my question.
Great. I can speak to that, and you know, Jua, if you wanted to jump in as well, to add anything that I miss. So, you know, given the structure of our workshops, you know, we're often doing it like a semester before, or even several semesters before they might be planning on implementing their assignment. So one of the things we do emphasize is that these are iterative, the projects that they're developing. And that we don't necessarily expect them to finish things, but we want them to sort of go through the projects. And the thing that sort of the incentive to do this is that if they want, that is the sort of the what they need to get done in order for us to sort of give them completion for the endorsement, if they would apply for that endorsement through the Drake Institute. So we ask them to do that. The other thing that we do in the last session, it used to be an extra session, but we've made it a chunk of the last time we meet. We have a kind of very informal showcase. So we ask them to kind of share where they are in their thinking, to ask questions about, you know, from the other participants and us about, you know, what are they wondering? What kinds of things are they thinking about? What doubts do they have? You know, concerns, and that, you know, it shows us at least some engagement. And I think also, and actually Kate could speak to this as well, is that the assessment, the endorsement process can be one part of a larger development initiative. So if they participate in this, they're also welcome to participate in what's called instructional redesign. Which, if they participate, they're, you know, sort of to provide a lot more data about how they're implementing things, go through some assessment. And as a result of this, they actually, if they are an eligible participant, they can get a raise. So Kay, you could probably talk in more detail about that as well, because I think that gives us a little bit more push if the participants choose to go through that process.
So thanks, Chris. And Jua, I don't want to, did you want to have additional comments first before I start talking about the institutional things?
In addition to the showcase, I think at the end of every session, we gave them an assignment to modify their writing prompt or assessment, like rubric or checklist and so on. And then we paired the instructors with similar interest or similar work. And I think having that peer feedback really gave them good opportunities to see how other instructors design or try to assess their students' writing, and also learning through learning by writing through the writing assignment. Yeah.
Oh, Ju, I'm really happy that you mentioned that because it aligns with the cohort model structure that we're using at Ohio State. I mean, we're really trying to scale this. Like we have all of these different endorsements, like the teaching through writing endorsement. And Chris is managing that through CSTW. We're partnering with him on that. But what we know is these intentional, scaffolded, intensive, reflective, professional development opportunities on a cohort model will leverage certainly individual change, but we think it's also a key to institutional change at the department and program level. So I think that cohort model that you all mentions is critical to that. The other, so when I talk about incentivizing, we do that in a couple of ways at Ohio State. So someone who completes Chris's teaching through writing Chris's, the CSTW's, it's Chris's, teaching through writing endorsement and completes that last reflection, that reflection then comes in, it's read, right, by our staff by Chris's team, and then it comes forward to the Institute. And if that person's a graduate student, the completion of that endorsement is transcribed. It shows on their official university transcript as a milestone. So when they leave the university as an MA or PhD student, this is also open to undergraduate students who might be interested in completing these endorsements. Especially aspiring teachers, it shows up on their university transcript as a milestone. And that's one of the ways we incentivize it for graduate students. For faculty, and Scott DeWitt just going up for full professor, and he just said this to me, it's actually in VITA, which is our promotion and tenure platform. So if a person has completed an endorsement, it's there and they can tick off and list all of the different endorsements that they've completed, and it becomes part of their promotion and tenure portfolio. Now, of course, what we don't know is what value is given to that work when it comes to promotion and tenure decisions in the departments, but at least it's legible and it's there. Also, as Chris noted, the completion of the endorsement will get our attention in the Institute, and we'll be reaching out to all of those folks who've worked with Chris to encourage them then to take a next step, which would be completing that course redesign or that curricular change in their courses. And doing that and taking that next step will leverage, this is just a one-time payment, Chris. It's no longer a base salary increase. It used to be. But now it's about an $1,150 one-time stipend for the completion and the demonstration and creation of that portfolio. And I put in the chat a link to How Are You Teaching, which is one of the ways we showcase the completion of those portfolios by some of the faculty at Ohio State.
Thanks much.
Amy?
I just wanted to follow up and ask, what about adjunct faculty? I work at an institution that's highly adjunct dependent. And so getting people to, volunteer their time for endorsements can be really challenging because we don't have any money either on top of everything else. So I wonder, how the endorsements work for adjunct faculty.
If a person is full-time adjunct, they're eligible. So if a person holds for us, it would be a senior lecturer. So Amy, we don't capture everyone. We don't, a person who's just teaching 1 to 2 courses per semester would not be eligible for the financial incentive, but they would be eligible for the completion and the sort of certificate, if you will. We've also extended our endorsement program from outside Ohio State to the entire state of Ohio. So we now have what's called the Ohio College Teaching Consortium. And that's one of the ways we're trying to reach contingent faculty, part-time faculty across the state of Ohio, including 2-year colleges, regional campuses, and so forth. There's still no money attached, but at least we're providing free, no-cost professional development opportunities for faculty across the state of Ohio. And most of those programs are recorded, and so they're available synchronously or asynchronously. And I'll post the link to that as well. It doesn't give them money, but at least it's some good, very high quality professional learning. And that includes Miami University, Kent State, Ohio University, University of Cincinnati, a number of universities in Ohio.
Any other questions? I know that, you know, in the hour format, we're not able to go into as much detail as we might have otherwise. So we're happy to share more details of some of the programming.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Amy, for that affirmation. Let me also note that it's Creative Commons licensed. You can take it and change it and use it, modify it. Just acknowledge our original authorship on it when you do. So please take it and change it and you know, align it with your particular institutional context, and give us feedback if you're interested as well. What works, what doesn't work, what's missing. We're always iterating.
And since Dan is here, I want to recommend his Michelle Cox and you know, their book on sustainable WAC, which has helped me kind of think through, very similarly to what you said, things that we've been thinking about well, but also some blind spots. So Dan, thank you for that work.
You're welcome. Did you see anything in your framework that is like missing in sustainable WAC? Something that you think we missed that comes out in your framework that you would have other folks think about?
That's a good question. I'll have to think about that one, because I feel like it's very much parallel to a lot of the questions that you all are asking. I also sort of think, you know, kind of sort of the flexibility that I think you guys account for in the book, that as we've been, a lot of the insights come in sort of after the fact, as we've been talking about these different programs, from our own different perspectives. So for example, you know, one thing that, you know, Jackie's insight, you know, thinking about the students and the student who work in the program as a stakeholder is something that, you know, I'd really thought about. In fact, that was sort of some of the motivation, but I hadn't thought about it, you know, through the particular ways that, you know, the innovation that Jackie, I'll say, brought, that she spoke to in professional development. So that wasn't something I was thinking, you know, when I read your book. I don't think it's something necessarily that you didn't mention, but I was more thinking about sort of the top down and the bigger picture, rather than the kinds of resources that we had already in-house. That's all, you know, some of the insights that, you know, just having this conversation among ourselves to prepare for this kind of, you know, brought some of those insights.
Yeah, I was going to say it's also not a gap. I agree with Chris on that, Dan, but what I think as I reflect on how we've been thinking about and deploying the framework, is I think I underestimated the critical importance within the institution, and we're at a very large institution, and so this might be context specific, of publicizing and disseminating the information about just getting, you know, telling those stories. Wendy, I'm thinking about your questions, think, how do we showcase, how do we think about and elevate the work of the individual instructors, and the commitments that they're making, Amy, that you noted, especially for contingent faculty or part-time faculty, is, you know, elevating their work and recognizing them and telling those stories is critical. And then tying those stories back to, not in disingenuous ways, but in productive, meaningful ways, to the other critical questions at play right now at the university and across our universities.
One thing that makes me think about, actually, that I think, you know, Dan's Sustainable WAC does address, that I just saw today, and I haven't mentioned this to UK yet. I was in a meeting where we're developing the new general education curriculum, in particular a reflection seminar that's going to be sort of a, you know, at the end of students' GE experiences, to, you know, to create a kind of portfolio, but also to kind of critically reflect on their work. And as part of that today, they were talking, a couple of my colleagues were talking about how they're revising the honors and scholars program and curriculum to sort of better reflect some of the things that we're trying to do in the new GE. And one of the things that they talked about was they're actually going to sort of, as is not as happening as much as it does now, having faculty actually have some, requirements for the to have honors designation for their courses. So we were talking about, creating endorsements to sort of help faculty think more carefully about the goals of the honors and scholars program and how they design their courses, how they engage their students with sort of the core outcomes and goals and philosophy of the honors curriculum in a way that sort of, uses the endorsements to sort of get faculty to sort of have some more impact on that curriculum. So I think looking for those wider opportunities where we might not have had that before, and to be able to make the connections between these various things are going on that I'll say in WAC, we've never really had these opportunities before, has been really, really great. So I think we're about at time. So thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate you joining us this afternoon and evening, wherever you are in your time zones. So we'd love to speak with you further and talk with you in the future. So thanks for your time.